So, so I just want to thank Harriet and Alexander for organizing this talk, and also for giving me the opportunity to talk today. And also, I'm very thankful we are doing this by Zoom and not just canceling. So thank you for that. It's actually my last day as a philosophy postdoctoral fellow at the Université de Paris in the Health and Law Institute. And in a month, I will fly to Toronto, where I will be a postdoctoral fellow as well, but in the Center of Ethics this time. So I changed the title of my talk for something a little bit more straightforward. What I'm going, oh, are we waiting for Alexander? I forgot.
So I'm here. Sorry, I don't know why I disappeared. But anyway, Juliette,
okay.
it's great to have you, and particularly that there's an exciting moment of you moving from Paris to Toronto. So it's great to have you. Back to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk about the struggle of philosophy in French medical school. So why this talk? From the beginning of my PhD, so I did my PhD at Sorbonne University. I mostly taught as an adjunct in medical faculties and science faculties. And last year, I was a fixed-term lecturer in philosophy at the Medical and Science University in Lyon, Université Claude Bernard. But that being said, my talk is not going to be a report of my own experience. I mean, sometimes I will share some anecdotal story, but I will rely on two French reports or documents that have been written on the state of philosophy and humanities teaching in the medical education, and that have been published respectively in 1999 and 2019. So it's two reports written 20 years apart. And so I think it's very interesting to look at these reports to see what has changed, if something has changed indeed. Okay, so why this talk? Because I feel a lot of the discourse about philosophy in medical education is quite optimistic. And that's why I wanted to talk about the struggles and also the traps. It doesn't mean I don't think philosophy shouldn't be taught in medical school. I actually think it should, and actually I'm a little bit biased since most of my jobs have been in medical school, so obviously I have some personal stake in this. I also want to, with my talk, I want to show that the struggles are not necessarily theoretical, although I think today we will talk about theoretical issues, but I want to show that it's also and maybe mainly a political and economic topic, and sometimes very practical or pragmatic topic. And so this talk will not be a traditional philosophical talk, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but yeah, bear with me. And hopefully the consideration I'm going to share today can be useful for you guys since you are not in France. Yeah, because I'm going to underline some struggles and traps, and so maybe those can be avoided if we are aware of them. So the main trap I'm concerned about is what I call the trap of medical humanism. So this is one discourse I hear a lot or read a lot about this. So from physicians, medical faculty, philosophers. So there's this idea that I studied in my dissertation that somehow philosophy, humanities, literature, they will somehow humanize medicine, and they will fix it because somehow it's too scientific, that kind of discourse. And also some of them argue that philosophy and other humanities will teach students empathy. So this is something I criticize in my dissertation, and I also criticize empathy in medicine overall. So at first I wanted to talk about this today, but since I already talked about these topics a lot, I thought I would dig a little bit further, like in the concrete issues. So the two ideas I'm going to argue for today are the idea that, well, yeah, sure, I would still argue for the fact that philosophy in medical school should not be about a vague humanizing students, like it shouldn't be about this. And if we do think that this is a goal of philosophy, then it is impoverished, watered down, and can be manipulated, and for various ends, and I think ideological, political, but also maybe I think economic. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me check. So we always, I guess French people, we always talk about the French paradox, but I think in this case, it's true. So philosophy is extremely popular in France. So to give you an idea, it is taught to almost all students in high school. So every year at the end of the, well, not this year because it was cancelled, but you have the philosophy exams from the baccalaureate. They're making the news, everybody's talking about it. And you know, the media, everybody loves philosophy and philosophers. And in particular, it is taught in the first year of medical schools and in the curriculum for more than 20 years. So since a law that has been passed in 1992, and actually since this time, there is 65 hours a year just for humanities and philosophy in the first year of medical school. And this hasn't changed since 1992, so there is a lot of humanities courses in the French medical schools. So it sounds great. I mean, if you want philosophy to be taught in a medical school, it sounds great. And there is also a strong French tradition in philosophy of science and philosophy of medicine. So I put you two pictures here. So you have Canguilhem on top. So I think Canguilhem is not very well known outside of France, but in France, it's like, he's very, very important. And then there is a bachelor that I put a picture of underneath. So the French paradox is that all of this seems great on paper, and I know people have been excited when I told them about this, but there are so many struggles. So I'm going to talk about them. Yeah. So the main problem, I mean, this is obvious, but when we talk about philosophy in medical schools, it's not even obvious in France what we mean by philosophy. So I think in the Anglophone context, we're going to think philosophy of medicine as philosophy of science and maybe medical ethics. And I don't know, maybe people will disagree, you tell me, but I feel that this is what you guys think. But in France, this is not obvious at all. So philosophy is mostly taught as history of philosophy. That the continental approaches, of course, are mainstream. I mean, philosophy of medicine is just a very, very, very small community within the philosophy of science community, which is already very small. So to give you an idea, when I started my PhD in the Sorbonne, so the biggest university in France, I was the only one doing something remotely close to philosophy of medicine. And the philosophy of science lab was so small within the whole philosophy department. And also, I also want to give you a little bit of context about the French medical school system. So in France, French medical school starts straight out of high school. So you finish high school and then you go to medical school. And up until this year, you had a competitive exam at the end of the first year with very low success rates, and then when you well, and if you succeed in this exam, then you get to continue your studies in the medical school, so your bachelor, your undergraduate study in medicine. And also up until recently, the universities, so science and humanities, just, you know, in short, they were quite separated and segregated. So once again, when I started my PhD in the Sorbonne, the university was only humanities university. And then, so I was giving classes and courses in another university. So it was very, very complicated, like with the paperwork and stuff. But then at the end of my PhD, my university had merged with another university, a science university. And so yeah. So then the university was both science and humanities, and it was easier to teach in the medical or science faculties. Yeah, I also wrote that philosophy can sometimes be conflated in France with psychoanalysis. And another anecdotal experience of mine was when I first studied philosophy in high school. The only book I was assigned to read was Freud. So, like, this is important. And also, and this will be a theme in my talk. Philosophy is very, very often conflated with other social and human sciences, with the SHS in French, or other humanities. Like, it's blurry. It's like one of these literary disciplines, basically. Yeah. So like I said, I'm going to focus and comment on two reports that have been written on philosophy in medical/science education. So the first report was actually commissioned by the Minister of Education, Research and Technology, so Claude Allègre. So it was really commissioned by the government. And it was written by a philosopher, you may know him, his name is Dominique Lecourt. He's a specialist in philosophy of medicine and philosophy of biology. And then in 2019, there was a second report, but it's, like, I want to stress, it's very, very different because it was not commissioned by the government. And I will tell you more about this later, but I want to stress that it's different in kind. So just think about it. I'm not going to compare these documents as if they had the same goal, or as if they were talking about the same things. So I will tell you a little bit more about this later on. So we start with of course, with the Dominique Lecourt report. So he was a professor Université Denis Diderot, which became Université de Paris because of this merging I was talking about. And actually, after this report, there was some hiring in the medical schools for philosophers and historians of medicine. So it had some kind of impact. I want to underline this. And this report, I think, is very interesting because already in 1999, it was already warning us against some of the traps that philosophy and education in medical schools can encounter. And the pictures here I chose for a reason, and because there's a trap with some money. And I think this is something I did not realize when I started to research this very concrete matters, but yeah, we will talk about this too. So this report is based on 33 meetings that Dominique Lecourt had with professors in philosophy and professors from science and medical schools on the topic. So you can imagine, like, doing 53 meetings during a year as a professor in a university. So this is a lot. This is a huge work, and the results are not are more like qualitative empirical results. So he's going to give us a synthesis of what he encountered. Although in each of the 53 meetings, he asked the same question. So already, so he's saying basically the same thing I said earlier, that the French paradox is that we don't really know what philosophy is or should be at all, and we don't really know what it should be in medical school either. And so, like I said, it's great. The philosophy is very popular because it's taught in high school, but there is a side effect, if I may say. And this is what Lecourt writes. Philosophical education in high school led university education to focus more and more on training future high school philosophy professors. And philosophy departments have focused on the programs of this state's examination, and as a result, the place taken by history of philosophy has kept growing. So basically what he's thinking of the fact that philosophy of science, history of science, or philosophy of medicine are, you know, a very, very, very small part of what French philosophers do in French universities. And the problem is that if there is not any philosophers of medicine or philosophers of science, who is going to teach philosophy in medical schools? And this is obvious, but I think we don't realize that this is like a big problem, because virtually we don't have enough philosophers of medicine or philosophers of science or even ethicists to teach in medical school. So who is teaching philosophy? So this might not come as a surprise to you, but so Lecourt reports that many philosophy and history classes are actually taught by the medical faculty. So they give classes on medical ethics, they give classes on history of chemistry in science faculties. They give the class on philosophy of biology, etc., etc. And Lecourt, of course, thinks that this is not satisfactory. He also notes that there are some conflict between what should be taught. So there is a divide and conflict on whether we should teach a continental approach or philosophy of science approach, which doesn't mean that the philosophy of science approach will be Anglophone. Like I said, there is a French tradition that could be taught that is not necessarily like continental approach. And so he says that the situation in medical schools compared to science schools is even more confusing. And so I found a report from 2006 that shows that roughly 80% of those teaching human and social sciences, so including philosophy, are actually medical faculties. And 10% only of these educators are, are specialized in human and social sciences and are hired as such. And the 10% that remains, I'm not very sure who they are. I don't know. And half of those 10% are actually high school certified professors, which is not a bad thing. So in the French context, the high school certification is like the most prestigious certification you can have in philosophy, basically. It's important, like I'm underlying this half of those high school certified professors because they are mostly trained in history of philosophy, and they probably have very, very few knowledge on anything related to medicine or modern science or history of medicine. So for me, this is a problem, I guess. So I don't want to engage in gatekeeping, I guess, but I think in this case, it's very problematic because yes, there's 65 hours of humanities teaching a year for the first year of medical school only, but is this like, can we trust that it is qualitative teaching? We have no idea and people just self-train, and like medical faculty just self-train and do that. So I think this is a big issue right now in French medical schools. So there's Lecourt also distinguishes between philosophy of medicine as philosophy of science and philosophy of ethics, and he notes that so in 1999 the problem, the main problem is actually the ethics courses, and this is what he writes. And actually, when I read this, I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm reading myself. So this is what he's writing. There is a kind of discomfort at the sight of increasing ethics classes taught by professors who, without any credential in philosophy, apparently think it is enough to share to their students their values and how they structure their personal opinion about their profession. I think what you're starting to realize maybe is that the core issue is that that people misunderstand what philosophy is. Like, people misunderstand. It's like personal opinions. It's like, I'm going to talk about my values. I'm going to have a chat. So yeah. And then he continues, it is evident that many professors of medicine are not ready to recognize the value of expertise in medicine other than theirs. They consider that medicine falls solely under the expertise. And from that, they do not easily accept the venue of non-medical teachers in their medical faculties. From that also, despite denials, the few philosophers and historians of medicine who are invited to medical faculties are left in an unfortunate situation. Despite their worth, they usually are restricted to temporary and fixed-term lectureship without any hope to receive a tenure-track tenure assistant professorship. So obviously this resonates a lot with my situation because over the years, I've taught classes in medical school and science schools as a temporary adjunct and a fixed-term lecturer and so on. And so yeah, there is a divide. A lot of the teaching is done by medical faculty, and when it's not done by the medical faculty, a lot of the time it's short-term, fixed-term, precarious faculties. So I just a few days ago, I realized that there was also 2 other reports on ethics in the medical faculties that had been published in 2003 and 2004. And it's very interesting because it's again the same issue. So in the first report, so the Cordier report, which was this time a very official report to the government, the report promotes ethics and medical ethics as something, so they say incorporated, so I'm not sure what it means. And then they say that it shouldn't be taught as, you know, rational discipline. It should be taught more like an existential discipline, where you are taught questions, but you are not given answers and you are not given any principles. And this is very close to the Levinas, well, I don't know how to say that in English, but Levinas, you know, Emmanuel Levinas, and actually his approach of ethics is very prominent still in medical ethics in France. And then there was a second report in 2004, and this time it was a report from the Comité Consultatif National d'Éthique. So it's a very strange committee, I guess. So I don't know if you heard of this. So it's I guess a committee of professionals on ethics, that's the name. But actually I'm not very clear, I'm very clear on what it is. What I mean is that when you look at the members of the committees, maybe you think, oh yeah, they're ethicists and philosophers, but they are not. So they are physicians, medical professors, science professor, journalists, writers. So any kind of personalities are in this committee, and they are actually chosen by the president. of France. So it's very strange. But anyway, this relates to the fact that I'm not so clear what is the medical ethics community in France and if there is even one. So, but they still argue that medical ethics should be taught by, humanities professor or ethics professor and not by medical faculty. So even then they say, yeah, we should give ethics to people who know ethics. And also they argue that we should forget about this existential only approach, and we should focus, on ethics as a rational discipline where you can have arguments and yeah. And fast forward today, so in the abstract of my talk, I said like, if you are not very clear on what philosophy is, and if you water down it so much, then you are at risk of philosophy being manipulated or used by people outside of philosophy for their own goals. And I just wanted to mention two controversies, I guess. So you have on the left Didier Raoult, very famous for the controversy. He studied on hydroxychloroquine as a potential drug for curing COVID-19. And so this guy is a professor in biology, right? Microbiologist. And this is a class he gave on what he called epistemology. And so I'm guessing you can guess the French that the three definitions he gives in this class are wrong. And this is like basic philosophy of science, right? So, and to me, like it might sound as an anecdotal example to you, but I was not surprised when this happened. I was not surprised that scientists would refer to philosophy to then argue some stuff in his own science. So Didier Raoult has argued that, you don't need RCTs, you don't need any kind of methodology, and you just need ethics. But then again, he has probably no idea about what medical ethics is. So yeah, and the second example, so you probably haven't heard of this other controversies. Unfortunately, I was very close to it because it was in Lyon when I was teaching there in the same university. So the university where I was teaching has two medical faculties, and I was teaching in the East faculty, but also sometimes I intervened in the South faculty, I guess. And so during the year, a journalist went undercover. So her name is Beatrice Canner. She went undercover during his class because he's a famous oncologist, but he was giving all the class in philosophy in that medical faculty. So he was taking all the decisions concerning the curriculum, the content, and was doing the class himself. And so she heard some disturbing things from students, and so she decided to go undercover, I guess, and see by herself. So there are some videos and some notes that she took. And what we discovered is that he was basically teaching his own very disturbing opinions about gender, about race, about I don't know, any kind of topics. He was on the extremely right-wing side, but also nothing in his classes had any philosophical solidity. He was just doing it for fun. Oh yeah, there was also a lot of sexism, but I said that already. And actually, I had to grade his exam. So I'm not telling you this story to criticize or anything, but basically, as a fixed-term lecturer in philosophy, I had to grade the exam written by a medical faculty that had no idea what they were writing, and this was very, very like I don't know how to explain, but yeah. So this is like things like this can happen, and I will explain why afterwards. But yeah, I will. So basically, what happens when all of this happens? The problem is that nobody knows what philosophy is anymore. It's all a mess. So yeah, and so Lecourt argues that we shouldn't reduce philosophy in medicine in medical faculties to ethics, but I think what he means is that the ethics classes are so are so unqualitative that's why we shouldn't reduce philosophy to that. But I believe that if you do ethics right, it could be very, very useful, especially in the French context. But I wanted to show you this quote that I think is very striking. So several interviewed philosophy professors have insisted that philosophy of science should be taught in a rigorous and authentic way, and that it should not be reduced to a mere rhetorical prop in a marketing campaign, or to a discourse used for endorsing technocratic interest, or even as a tool for dealing with perceived irrational social matters. In brief, philosophers should not become agitators of ideas by opposition to proof workers. So I think he perfectly got what the issue was, which is philosophy is, and also other humanities are thought to be, there is science, which is perfect, and then there is philosophy, which is going to deal with everything that is messy and irrational and social and stuff like that. And so yeah, and the problem is that if you do that, then philosophy is completely watered down, and it's not very useful anymore. And also I think it backfired, because then everybody can be a philosopher and anybody can argue whatever they want, because nothing has meaning anymore, I guess. So oh yeah, I wanted to before going to the second report, I wanted to show you that in the French context, the law actually can cover the content of the French medical curriculum. And we can see that from new laws to new laws, there is some a shift. So from philosophy, medical ethics, philosophy of science, history of medicine, to a mix of human sciences and social sciences and humanities. So this is what I show you. So in 1992, the focus was on philosophy of science and history of medicine. But then over the years, it became big question in ethics in society. There is, for instance, until recently, there was a mandatory course that I actually taught, which was health, society, and humanity. So yeah, you see that at first there was philosophy in other disciplines, and I guess like this, and then became a bundle of everything that is not science, basically. And like I said, I think this is a problem, because then it's not very vague what the goal is anymore. Which, yeah. So the other difficulties Lecourt warns us about, one is very specific to the nature of the French medical school system. So, like I said, in the first year, at the end of the first year, you have a standardized competitive exam, and often the philosophy or human science, social science paper is the only one that is written, which is a written exam and not standardized. And it's very difficult to implement, because you end up either just teaching contents and you teach contents and students write contents, or there's the worry that the grading of philosophy papers are going to be too subjective and not going to be fair. And fairness in the context of a very competitive exam that will decide whether you will be a physician or not in your life is very important. Yeah, and despite that, for instance, when I was a lecturer in Lyon, so we gave the humanities professor, we gave the courses, but at the end, the grading was done mostly by medical faculty. And we had to do double blind, sometimes triple blind grading, just to ensure fairness, because this is something that they worry a lot. Another issue, of course, is that not enough philosophy professors, like I said, and especially not philosophy of medicine or philosophy of science professors, and I think also ethics. And the faculties are mostly precarious. So overall, the core conclusion is that there are some local success, and I think in Lyon, despite what I said about this whole controversy, in Lyon East, I mean, the department in philosophy and human sciences is great, but the impression is patchwork work. Like everybody is doing what they can with what they have, and they hire. I mean, if they can find graduate students that works on this topic, it's great. But maybe they can, and it's not going to be so great. And also, I wanted to mention that this year, everything was changed. So everything I told you about has been changed. So there will not be any more state examination at the end of the first year. And the whole structure of the bachelor degree, which was only mainly scientific disciplines, has been changed. And the law now doesn't give you the content of the curriculum, but it just gives a little bit of ideas. And also the system has moved from one undergraduate medical bachelor to a system of minors, majors. So I know maybe this is obvious to people outside of France, but these systems like minors, majors, like they don't really exist in France yet, because before the university they were separated. And the results has been that this year in 2020, there was a huge increase in TT position in philosophy of medicine and other human and social sciences disciplines. So from 0 or none, or maybe 1 sometimes a year, to a dozen in 2020. So here we see that that the government couldn't act on, like, was not able to change anything when they were just changing the curriculum. But here, because everything was restructured and changed, maybe there will be some change in the problem of not enough humanities faculties and medical faculties teaching their courses. But of course, maybe it's just this year, because maybe it will not continue in the next years. I don't know. I hope it will continue, but I don't know. Yeah. And I wanted also to mention very quickly the problem of power dynamics. So there is one problem is who hire philosophers and why, when the whole medical faculty is only medical faculty, like who is going to hire the philosophers? And is it going to be the medical faculty? But what happens if you're a philosopher that have a very critical approach to medical research? Are they going to want you, or are they going to want something that look more safe? So this is an issue which I encountered personally because in the committee where I applied, there was no philosopher of medicine. It was more like a bunch of humanities disciplines and medical faculty who usually had the power to decide in the end. And what happened when you have the only, for instance, philosopher in the medical faculty? What happened until recently, you had a medical faculty supervisor, like supervising what you're going to teach. They're going to ask you, can you teach that? Can you teach this? So you're not exactly free of what you're going to teach. And there is also a problem of the difference in symbolic prestige or symbolic power between the disciplines. So this is a big worry. So I remember when I was teaching last year, so we had collective slides because we were all teaching the same content. And we had all our names on the first slide. And although I had not submitted my PhD, like I was not a doctor yet, I was not a PhD, I had not finished my PhD, they brought, like the faculty wrote that I was a doctor because they were worried otherwise the students would not take me seriously. And the irony is that if you're a graduate or PhD in philosophy, you're not going to have this prestige. But if you're a medical faculty, like, you know, Didier Raoult or that other guy from Lyon I told you about, you're going to have an extra, they're going to gain from this. Like, there is a lot to gain as a medical faculty to appear as a philosopher. Otherwise, but there is nothing to gain to be just a philosopher. This is what I'm trying to say. This actually, yeah, no, I'm confusing my notes. Sorry, I'm going to move now quickly. Yeah, I should go quicker. So what happened, like when you remember that dates and then the different laws I show you, and I said, yeah, I mean, philosophy and history, like, they became humanities with other disciplines. And this is, I think this is why the last report I'm going to talk about is interesting to look at, because this is basically in the title, like they're not looking at philosophy anymore, they're going to look at medical humanities and ethics. Okay, so this is a report that has been written and co-written by Cynthia Fleury. Oh, I made a typo there. She's a professor in philosophy, a psychoanalyst, founder and head of the Chaire of Philosophy in the hospital, and also a promoter of the new French School of Care, so that, and also medical humanism. So for instance, she published a book last year on care, le soin, being humanism. So you see, medical humanism is strong, I guess, in France. And so the basic idea is that we need medical humanism because medicine has become too scientific, too positivistic, and you know, we need some humanities to fix that. Yeah, so she basically argues that what she means by humanizing future doctors is that she wants humanities to give the professional training of physicians, although I think it's not very clear what it means. So I'm just lost in my notes. So I said earlier that this report for me is very different from the first one, because this report is not really a study, an empirical study of the state of humanities teaching in the university. It's more like a literature review on work that already have been done. So for instance, the Lecourt report. But I think the report here, the goal is to promote that medical humanism. And most importantly, the idea is to promote medical humanities and medical humanism outside of universities, in what she called the local innovations or local pedagogical innovations. So in the Lecourt report, the government and then Dominique Lecourt, they didn't even ask them this question. Like for them, philosophy is going to be in medical school, if it's going to be, taught to physicians. But here in this report, it's not philosophy anymore, it's going to be humanities. And also it's not going to be promoted in universities, but outside. And and this is a few quotes, maybe we can go quicker, on Fleury arguing that we need to humanize doctors and promote humanism. I will read the first quote to you. So it's not only about transmitting to doctors disciplinary content or a shared culture in humanities, but about training future stakeholders in the health sector and cultivating within them a disposition not only for humanities, but for humanity itself, according to the project of a transforming type of humanism interested not only in digesting knowledge and principle, but in how we act in life. So I think we see that, again, there's this very vague idea of philosophy or humanities, like we don't really understand what the goal is, and it's more about, I don't know how to explain, but I would argue that it's very vague and it's not helpful. Basically, that's what I would argue. And also in this report, she also promotes medical humanities as a way to decrease, to deal with the decrease in empathy within the health sector. So I have a paper on this specific topic forthcoming. And basically what I argue in the paper is that, first of all, it's not clear empathy is decreasing in medical students, because we don't really know how to measure empathy, like emotional empathy, in a very clear way. And my second argument is that also on a moral level, it's not very clear that we should have empathy in medicine or more empathy in medicine. And I can send you the paper, but it's only in French for now. So like I said, this new report goal is to promote humanities outside of the university, which are all public, not all, which medical universities in France are public, right? And here humanities are promoted outside of this context. And Cynthia Fleury herself is the head of what is called a Chaire of Philosophy within the hospital. And what it is actually a non-lucrative organization funded by private and public patronage and sponsorship. So although it's private, it also has connection with universities and hospitals. So what will happen is that they pay a researcher to give talk within the organization, or they will partner with some university and they will give some funding, and then the university can organize some academic seminar. And I actually was invited in one of them. And this is described as a hybrid pedagogical innovation. And it's also a way for Cynthia Fleury and also another scholar in France, which is Tourette Turgis, to promote what they call the French care. And I just wanted to show you what it means to have this type of organization that is funded by private, especially private sponsorship. So the French education minister is funding this chair. There is also the city of Paris, but you have Vinci, which, they make the highways, you have a bank, you have Michelin, you have a health insurance company, and you have different foundations so I looked up and they're all very luxury resorts and wines. So it's very strange, like why would this foundation care about philosophy in the hospital, right? But I should say that maybe I'm very I'm too cynical. So I think we can discuss this. Is it bad or is it good or neutral? And this is a diagram that is in the report, and this is why I think the report is here to promote this type of innovation and not really, to tell us about the situation in the public universities. And you have the Chaire in the philosophie à l'hôpital, and then you have the Université des Patients. And so this is the second innovation that has been promoted to as a figurehead of this French care school of thought. And what it is, it's a university. Well, it's not a university. Well, it's more like it's not a public university. It's more like an organization, but the name is Université. And they teach patients, but they teach very few patients about medicine mainly. And that's why it's seen as an innovation. For instance, since its creation in 2009, it has taught 120 patients, students. And it's funded by public universities and private pharmaceutical funds. So for the last year, it has been funded by 1 million euros a year by the pharmaceutical company Merck. But I know it's much more than that because they have many different kind of sponsors, right? So the situation basically is in the universities, nothing much has changed. So the humanities disciplines are still massively taught, but are massively taught by medical faculties. And because there is not enough money to hire or will to hire specific philosophy or history scholars and so on. And the rest are, precarious faculties or graduate students. And on the other side, you have these new organizations that are funded by the state, but also by private companies to promote this kind of medical humanism, medical humanities, or philosophy, like the shared philosophy. Like it's really about philosophy, right? So this is the part of my talk that is very cynical, but I'm happy to discuss. Maybe I'm being too cynical, or maybe it's my French brain that is cynical, I don't know. But there is an increase in funding for health humanities, but it's going to be outside universities, and it's not going to benefit future doctors. And so maybe there is some kind, like, you remember this quote I showed you from Dominique Lecourt. He was warning us against making philosophy some kind of marketing technocratic prop. And I think that's what happened. So basically, there is some kind of pharmaceutical or not even pharmaceutical. So in the case of a Chaire of philosophie à l'hôpital, it's not pharmaceutical companies, it's more like random private companies. But there is some kind of humanities philosophy washing going on. I don't know I don't know how to call this, but maybe there is even some kind of philosophy washing. Like, is it possible? So my very, very cynical idea is that somehow people wanted philosophy in medical school and also other humanities disciplines. And they wanted so much that they had to sell themselves. Like, you want to say, yeah, what we do is very important, but somehow we ended up selling it, like for real money. And so there is a tension. Like, you want to market yourself as philosophy in the medical school, but it's ambiguous, because if it's not going to benefit the universities, who is it going to benefit? It is not clear. However, as we've seen, the 2020 reform could change things, because the universities are now merged, and students are not forced to only do science for 3 years. They can do some humanities and then come back to the medical curriculum. So maybe this will change, and there will be new hires, and maybe the philosophy of medicine community will increase, and everything will be fine. But yeah, when I finished my slides, I realized I only talk about the struggles and have nothing to offer as to solutions or suggestions. Like, I didn't go as far as thinking I could fix this situation. But maybe, you know, it's not that bad and I'm just being too cynical. So I think we can discuss this. And I just added the reference of my work on medical humanism and empathy. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Juliette. That was fascinating. It's really interesting to get a perspective on the way things are done. Yeah, not very far away, but yeah, in a very different manner nonetheless. Okay, we've got a bit of time. You're almost 20 minutes for questions. Harriet was saying that there's a way of putting your hand up. So please do that in order to ask a question, and I'll call on you, or if necessary, use the chat box to indicate that you want to ask a question. So, oh, right, good. Okay, I've already got some questions. So the first one I saw was from Adrienne. So if you want to unmute yourself, oh, I'll unmute you, Adrienne, and then ask your question. Oops. Sorry, I think we're both unmuting you. So, well, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the lecture, Juliette. It was very interesting. I was wondering, you talked about the difficulties or like a potential problem in teaching philosophy being enforcing or in putting ideological, like kind of using it for your own ideological means, or it can be used for political means. I was wondering, historically, the humanities and probably, and even more so today, has been quite left-wing, or a lot of the people in humanities are very left-leaning. And in the current like socioeconomic culture, the opposing view is a lot of times silenced or cancelled and things like that. And university has generally been a place where different ideas should be discussed to find the best solutions, and especially in something like philosophy. Don't you think this, I guess, this big majority movement moving towards the left in the humanities can cause that a lot of, let's say, opposing or right-wing views can be silenced a lot of times during that, and therefore furthering like a leftist ideological view to some extent?
Yeah, I guess I didn't finish my story about what happened last year in Lyon. So, like I said, there was a journalist, like it was not really about canceling that specific professor, and the problem wasn't really just his, well, it was a problem, like, so for instance, he assigned a book for the philosophy courses in the first year of medical school, and the book was not even about medicine. It was just, you know, a book by a candidate in some local election, and you know, on a specific side of the political spectrum. So it was very strange because he's not even teaching philosophy of medicine, so it's not very clear what he was doing. But anyway, there was actually a backlash, I guess, online after the journalist went undercover, and the Minister of Education ordered an investigation. So yeah, there was an investigation, but the conclusion of the investigation was that anything can be taught in philosophy. It's completely freedom of thought, and you can even teach inadequate and, you know, wrong philosophical, like, I don't know. I'm sorry, my cat are fighting. So yeah, there was no backlash or anything, and as far as I am aware, he's still teaching whatever he's teaching, but there was many issue of sexual harassment as well that was not solved at all. And maybe it's true that humanities are left-wing oriented in the UK or the US, although I'm not sure, but in France it's not very clear. I think a lot of philosophy scholars or even humanities scholars are very conservative, and it's pretty much the norm. So I wouldn't say that it's more like the opposite. Usually, like I don't know if it's the opposite, but it's pretty like everybody cancel each other, so we both get canceled, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Alexander, you've got to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Juliette, and thanks, Adrian. Alex Broadbent, you're next on my list.
Thank you. Thanks, Juliette. I really enjoyed that. It's very interesting, partly just because it's an insight into into France as much as into philosophy in France. I mean, the idea of philosophy school exams being covered in the national newspaper is it's great. I love it.
Very popular.
But I completely take the point about that going with a different idea about what philosophy is, and a very inclusive one. I mean, I was interested because you mapped out the relationships between philosophy and society, and you also talked a bit about the relationship between philosophy of medicine and philosophy and medicine, and sort of saying, well, where philosophy is taught, it's not necessarily philosophy of medicine, which perhaps would be more appropriate. But I wondered also about the place of medicine in French society. So I'm very interested in the fact that the Anglo-American English literature in philosophy of medicine is dominated mainly by American sort of milieu presumption about the nature of medicine and what it is, and you get a lot of stuff being written that just actually doesn't even make sense from an English perspective, because medicine is done quite differently here, and this is true in many places. I mean, it's something that frustrates me in general about the discipline of philosophy of medicine. So, and I was thinking, for example, in Germany, obviously complementary alternative medicine is mainstream, and in the I was going to say the West. I don't mean the West. I mean the Anglo world. It's typically not. In South Africa, traditional medicine has to be covered by legislation, because it's medicine is so culturally imbued that if you just say, oh, that's a load of nonsense, then you're kind of you're sort of destroying a whole, rejecting a whole culture, which is just obviously unacceptable. And that leads to changes in to different attitudes and tolerances and so forth. University of Johannesburg offers degrees in homeopathy, which would be kind of unthinkable for your average, English red brick. Anyway, that's just all by way of preface. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how medicine, the role of medicine in French society, as is it seen differently? Are there differences in the way it's practiced and in its status it has compared to in the sort of Anglo-American literature? That's what's assumed in the Anglo-American literature.
Well, I guess the two questions are related, because French medicine is not very keen on evidence-based medicine. It's not the mainstream view, I would guess. So, and that's why personally, I think philosophy of medicine could be useful, to bring other ideas, especially in epistemology, but also ethics, because medical ethics, I think, is not well developed. And for instance, it was not surprising to me that there was this Raoult scandal, because this is what French... Shut up, cats, sorry. They're just fighting. I don't know what to do. So it wasn't surprising to me that this, because from, already in the 70s, there was French doctors giving up, saying, oh yeah, we found the drug, it works. Yeah, we haven't done any tests, but we think it works, because, evidence-based medicine is not something that that most people care about. And that's why we also have homeopathic medicine, which is huge, and it's funded by the state, right? And actually in the university I was teaching, there was a whole building named after the pharmaceutical company selling homeopathic drugs. So,
wow.
So, well.
So it is different.
So it's very different. And I think that's why there is a sense of entitled, like they really think they can teach everything because, like, I don't want to generalize, but there is this idea that physicians know everything, like they know everything. So of course they know philosophy or any other disciplines. And actually I had students told me that say, we don't need philosophy, we already know everything. And this was their first year medical students. No, second year medical students. So medicine is very prestigious. If you're a physician in France, you won at life, basically. So they're very, very important in society, and media love them, you know, as much as philosophers. So it's no wonder why they would be both, I guess. And yeah, and about ethics, for me, it's very, like, I'm very puzzled by the situation because surprisingly, in the first year and even the second year, medical ethics is not taught in medical school. So we teach other stuff in humanities. And I personally had to teach with a health professional, like a medical faculty. And I wanted, you know, to bring a little bit of, you know, let's talk about consent, let's talk about paternalism. You know, these I think are pretty basic in medical ethics, and yet they had no idea what I was talking about. They had no idea. So my co-professor was telling the students that there is, you know, too much paternalism, but there is also not enough paternalism. So I'd say overall, I mean, it's just anecdotal, but there are some lot of sociologists who works on this. The problem is that French medicine is very, very paternalistic. And I think here, medical ethics education could play a role and change a little bit of that, but I don't know if that answers
yeah,
the question.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Juliette and Alex. And we'll move to another Alex, who's got her hand raised. I got 3 questions in my pile to try and get through in the next 7 or so minutes. So let's try and keep them sort of fairly brief. So Alex.
Hi, is that me? Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Brilliant. So, I mean, firstly, thanks for the lecture. It's been, you know, very interesting, and certainly there are lots of parallels with stuff that I've noticed in the UK as well. But to keep the question short and sweet, you said a lot about the purpose of philosophy and medical humanities more broadly being supposedly to humanize medical students, which you sound very skeptical of. And I wondered why, one, if there's any particular reason that you're skeptical of that, and 2, if you don't see that as the role of teaching philosophy to medical students. You've started to allude to it, but what do you see the role of teaching philosophy to medical students as being?
So what I argued in my dissertation and elsewhere is that if you focus too much on this idea of humanizing or medical humanism, you can't even start to have any kind of ethical or epistemological approach to medicine anymore. Like, you can't criticize science since you are just completing or adding something to it. You can't really criticize or, you know, give some ethical principles of action because it's not even a topic, because you're just here to give a little warm. I mean, my main issue is that I'm not clear what it means. Like, what does it mean? Everybody is human. Like, it doesn't mean anything, right? And my understanding it was that it meant bringing empathy. And so, like I said, I have a whole paper, so it would take too long. But basically, the idea is that emotional empathy from medical students and then medical physicians is not necessarily a good thing. And one of the main reasons I think it's not, well, because empathy is biased, but also it's too much to ask to people that are already facing higher rates of fatigue and emotional distress and psychological issues. So it's, and also, yeah, sorry. So you're missing philosophy of science, like which has a lot to say about medical knowledge. You're missing medical ethics, like, and you know, let's talk about consent, because this is not something medical French student will hear about necessarily. And then you're also missing the structural and political issue behind the health systems, and by which I mean you don't, for example, if you say, people are dehumanized and they are not very empathetic to me, you don't think of maybe, you know, they are overworked, maybe there is something wrong at the management level, and you have all these issues that just are, you know, thrown under the carpet, and then it's just, you know, a talk about what is humanity, and then we don't fix or address very, very concrete issues in the health systems. So yeah.
Great, thanks very much. Anastasios, so you've got a quick question so we can get a couple yours and one more in? Anastasios. Okay, Harriet, why don't you go ahead?
I am muted myself.
Oh, you are here. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Juliette, for this fascinating talk and introducing us in the French reality. My understanding is that there is like, let's have this foundational level of philosophy, and then let's go and do our medical work. I have to say I'm a psychiatrist myself, and I have some background in philosophy. And when I was hearing you, I was listening to you, I had in my mind a paper by Hilary Putnam about ethics without ontology, and it was practically, we are a practical discipline, and we have to make decisions and we have to act, and we do that without the metaphysical foundations of our, you know, discipline to be clear-cut. So I wonder if really a way to introduce philosophy is not by having it as a separate subject matter in a curriculum, but actually through some kind of problem-based learning or practice-based learning, workshop and exercises and examples, try to blend it there and raise questions and ways of approaching or introducing basic disposition of how to engage with certain things. That's my talk, my question, sorry.
Well, the issue will be that who's going to do that? The medical faculty?
By having, I mean, I'm saying that because as a doctor and having an interest, I may, you know, move between two sides. And I understand there are not many doctors having this philosophy background. But I guess by bringing philosophers, it will be a very fruitful mutual exchange. Also, philosophy, PhDs, etc., you know, get an idea what the practical side of doing medicine is like, and then maybe offer their perspective, or, you know, there can be also an aporia in the end, you know, like, but that's good enough at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I'm not necessarily against that. So during my year as a lecturer at the medical faculty, we had a class a bit like that. It was like role-playing, like students were role-playing being students, patients and physicians. And then we had some discussion about what they did and why. And so we were two teachers, one medical faculty, one like I can't say philosophy because some of my colleagues were not, but humanities, and then that's where the paternalistic comment happened, because some of the medical faculty, they didn't go through any training in all of these topics, so they have no idea. And so I was trying to explain to the students, yeah, maybe it's not good, you know, that you try to manipulate the patient to do what you wanted them to do, like no consent. Now, very basic, like, let's talk about this. Why did you do that? Do you think it's a good idea? blah, blah, blah. And then I was completely undermined by the medical professor because he had no idea about this. And he was like, of course, you're going to have to manipulate your patients, otherwise they're not going to obey you. So it's like, okay. And so I don't know how it will go. Like if you, like, I don't know, just people are not trained to do that. So.
But you unmasked something there. You unmasked something there. I mean, you put in the out there the fact that there is this paternalism, and that's a different issue.
Yeah, but I couldn't because there is, like I said, he was I think he was a cardiac faculty professor, and I was graduate student philosophy and a woman also. But let's not even talk about this. So like I couldn't even, like, what should I say? Like, I don't have the authority in the views, like in the eyes of the students. I don't have it. So I can try, but it's difficult. And there is also possible conflicts with the faculty, the medical faculty. He's not going to like that I say he's, saying nonsense on ethics. Like I can't say it. It's going to have going to be a conflict. That's not possible.
Okay, well, on that unfortunate note, that's a despairing note. Thank you very much, Juliette, for a really interesting and insightful talk. I think we all gained from